Hello everyone, thanks for dropping by. In case you didn't recognise her, that's Kristen Stewart on the screen, and the only thing I've ever seen her in is trailers for the Twilight Saga, which is what she's most famous for. She's about 5'4.5", 5'5", so she's just a tad shorter than me. Even when she's wearing heels, she'd probably be about the same height as me. And the usual question, would I date her if I was super wealthy? Nope, she's a lesbian now. And when she wasn't a lesbian, the guys that she was dating are much taller than me, so she's completely off limits. Even if I was 36 like she is now, sorry, and I was super wealthy, it just wouldn't really be worth it. She could be sweet and nice, but she bats for the other side. Plus, the way she looks there is different to what she usually looks, as her hair is usually a complete mess, but she's got it fairly decent. And when I was at high school, there was a few girls that looked similar to her face there. So, anyway, as before, it'd be interesting to see what she looks like in real life, but when it comes to dating and that, nah, I wouldn't bother. Now, last week, as you know, I mentioned and tried to find a few things about the Great Wealth Transfer. So I've been looking around some more, and I found a few things which are sort of MGTOW-ish. But first, the first thing I found was this. Now, this is a feminist site. This was done on March 27, 2024, and it's a sort of a crowing piece. As you can read, what is the feminization of wealth? And it said a world where women have more wealth and more power is coming. And here at Elevest, we're talking about a lot of what that could mean. And it says it's a term to describe a world in which women have more money, and this world isn't just a daydream, it's a world more likely to usher in because are pretty powerful mega trends in motion right now. And one of those mega trends is the great wealth transfer we've researched and written about in our 2024 Women and Wealth Society. It's a name given to the next 20 or so years when women will increasingly inherit money directly from baby boomer men who will leave their wealth to their wives. They're thinking that's counting your chickens before they're hatched, who live longer than they do, and then to their kids. It's also bigger than that. Another mega trend leading to the feminization of wealth. Women are increasing their earning power. This can happen as a natural result of women now making up the majority of college and postgrad graduates. Well, if they've got all this money coming in, all these postgraduate women can pay off the student debt, setting up to earn more money, and with women starting more businesses. It can happen with increasing diversity of boards. In other words, DEI, didn't earn it, maybe driving a tipping point in women CEOs of big companies. And then it goes more crowing on, and we'll see more of this in finance. Simp, and is she an unmarried mother? And less of this. Now, as I said, this is a crowing piece. To fast forward to May 19th this year, in Forbes, what happens when women control 30 trillion in wealth? The company and the country's finances pretty much will be fucked. It says we are in the middle of one of the largest wealth transfers in history, an estimated $120 trillion, expect to move from one generation to the next, with roughly 30 trillion going to women. Much of the conversation is focused on the scale of this transfer. The numbers are significant, and they signal a major redistribution of financial resources in the years ahead. The more important question, however, may be what happens when financial leadership moves it into different hands. And then we have an explanation of why, this, that, and the other. And naturally put all these links below. I had a serious look round, and the vast majority, in fact 99.9% of what I've found is on this theme: women taking control of the vast majority of a nation's wealth. But as you know, MGTOW is a philosophy and a way of life in which guys don't want to get married, and they don't marry. So I did play around with words. The only thing I could find associated with MGTOW and the Great Wealth Transfer was this, and this, using the AI. It says the MGTOW and the Great Wealth Transfer. I just played around with words. The intersection of MGTOW and the Great Wealth Transfer highlights a growing trend of self-directed, independent and wealth accumulation among men who deliberately avoid traditional family and marriage. The multi-decade Great Wealth Transfer estimated 84 trillion assets, yada yada yada, from the baby boomer generation to younger heirs, and individualized wealth accumulation. MGTOW philosophy places a heavy emphasis on self-ownership, financial independence, and avoiding the legal and financial risks associated with marriage and divorce. Consequently, men in the demographic trend to control their own assets and portfolios completely avoid joining estate structures. Lack of direct descendants, because MGTOW men involve stepping away from traditional nuclear family structures. Many adherents do not have direct children or spouses, i.e. women, to leave their estates to. As a result, the wealth transfer for this demographic is less about intergenerational family succession and more focused on giving while living. In other words, giving your money away to people, not keeping it for yourself. Leaving assets to trusts, but who's the trust going to give the money to? Philanthropic causes, in other words, charities and whatever floats your boat, or male-centric organizations. And it says, contrast with the feminization of wealth, which that article follows, and all the others. Financial experts note that a massive proportion of great wealth transfer, up to 70%, according to studies by the Bank of America Institute. If you click on that, see what that brings up. Decline all, your wealth, your journey. Yeah, it's just an advert. Get rid of that. Is actually transitioning to women. This is largely due to horizontal wealth transfers between spouses. Since women have a strategically higher life expectancy than men and often outlive their husbands, MGTOW adherents intentionally opt out of this specific horizontal wealth transfer. So, women are not going to get their hands on MGTOW money, in other words, choosing instead to manage and retain their own wealth portfolios independently throughout their entire lives. Investment preferences, unbound by traditional family obligations, MGTOW investors often focus on personal wealth management, aggressive asset building, and hedging against economic uncertainty. In other words, going their own way. This investment focus largely leans to self-directed retirement, real estate, and financial autonomy rather than multi-generational family trust planning. Now, play around with words again. MGTOW Great Wealth Transfer. I found another version. The concepts of MGTOW and the Great Wealth Transfer intersect primarily male economic independence, more or less what the other thing has said. Financial independence as a core MGTOW tenet. Wealth accumulation by remaining single. These men aim to avoid anomaly, child support and split assets, redirecting what had been household or family expenses to personal saving, real estate and investment portfolios. And then the great wealth transfer and single men. The great wealth transfer estimated to pass down 84 trillion, will inevitably benefit many men within the millennium and general X demographics who identify in this philosophy. So 84 trillion is not going to end up in the hands of women by 2045. Contrasting economic viewpoints, the MGTOW manosphere perspective, many advocates argue that nuclear family model is no longer economically viable or beneficial to men, pointing to perceived bias in family courts and rising cost of living. They believe that the great wealth transfer helps young men by giving them inherited capital on their own terms. In other words, the young guys become financially independent and self-reliant. And the broad economic prospects, socialist economists often view these movements as reactions to pressures on later stage capitalism and the decline of the male breadwinner norm. On macro level, the great wealth transfer is heavily, changing the investment landscape with younger, more independent demographics prioritizing different asset types than their baby boomer parents. As I said last week, this great wealth transfer to women is more or less a one-off, and the feminization of wealth. Increasingly broader analysts of the great transfer note that women will inherit the majority of the assets changing hands, because women statistically have longer life expectancies. And the horizontal wealth transfer, to learn more about economic transfer, Decade reads about. I clicked on that, and the links here, Merrill Lynch, it doesn't mention MGTOW at all. Another playing around with words, will MGTOW men affect the great wealth transfer? It says men in the MGTOW movement will not fundamentally alter the scale of the great wealth transfer. Maybe, but as more and more men become MGTOW, there's more and more not marriage, and there's less and less horizontal transfer. But they will affect how, where and when the capital flows and is spent. Their lifestyle choices redirect significant assets away from traditional family structures. So MGTOW in a way will affect this great wealth transfer. And it says the rise of solo accommodation. MGTOW emphasizes self-ownership, avoiding traditional cohabitation or marriage and all the rest. Shift to life living with giving, and that traditional inheritance model relies on passing accumulated wealth horizontally on a longer living spouse. Imbalance of feminization of wealth. The great wealth transfer is largely driven by boomer men leaving their assets to their wives, who generally outlive them. MGTOW men who choose not to marry or leave assets to women may incrementally reduce the horizontal transfer of capital. And different spending and asset preference. Younger generation, including those adhering to the MGTOW principles, have different financial habits. They prioritize liquid, self-directing investments and tech-forward asset management. The bottom line, while MGTOW men represent a sub-demographic, their individualistic financial decisions contribute to a broader social trend, the fragmentation of the traditional nuclear family assets. This results in smaller, more dispersed wealth pools rather than a massive systematic shift in the overall $84 trillion transfer. So MGTOW men are going to take a large degree of that 84 trillion that's not going to end up in women's hands. And the last thing I did, will MGTOW affect the great wealth transfer? MGTOW men will not significantly alter the macroeconomic scale of the great right transfer, while the movement focuses on men intentionally avoiding marriage and cohabiting, what is the other one said. The great transfer will involve 120 trillion shifting from baby boomers to younger generations. Women statistically outlive men. Horizontal wealth transfers wealth is frequently transferred to women through inheritance and divorce settlements, rather than solely from parents to children. How MGTOW differs on impact, individual allocation. While the movement may lead to different spending and investing habits on an individual level, more disposable income directed towards personal hobbies, travel and independent investments, rather than supporting a family. It does not alter who receives the vast majority of intergenerational boomer wealth, but if there's no children, it will. Household structure, because MGTOW encourages men to avoid traditional family structures, these men are less likely to participate in the typical wealth accumulation cycles centered around nuclear families who commingle marital assets. Ultimately, the transfer is driven by demographics that heavily favor women, but as more and more women become single and childless, they're not going to get their hands on any money, with experts estimating that women could control a substantial portion of global wealth. But if MGTOW keeps growing all over the world, then that's not going to happen. In the coming decades, to dive deeper in how this shift will affect the financial landscape, read the World Economic Forum, that relevant talking shop, or explore Forbes Women and Wealth Report. If you click on that, it pops up that one which I've got there. So, women might think that they're going to get their hands on lots of money, but this, and this gives men a vote in who's going to get all that money. But I found this to support MGTOW, understanding why we're walking away from modern dating relationships, the rise of MGTOW. This is masculine synergy, and not going to go through it, but there's lots of links to lots of MGTOW videos to give you an idea. You notice even in that, the two models, he is a little bit taller than her. The financial response to the communication gaps. Women's responses to the mass withdrawal range from confusion to anger at adaptation that we've seen on the TikTok videos, on the other MGTOW channels on YouTube. Many generally cannot understand why women are no longer approaching, no longer pursuing, no longer willing to invest time and money in dating. That seems, from a male perspective, designed to extract value while offering little in return. And then social media, the worst thing that ever happened to women, and the broader social implications. The implications of millions of men withdrawing from relationship markets extend far beyond individual choices. Birth rates in Western nations have collapsed to levels below replacement. That's also going to affect the great wealth transfer, because there's fewer babies being born. You can't transfer the money to the next generation. With fertility rates in some countries below 1 per child per woman, South Korea, often cited as a canary in a coal mine, projected to halve its population by 2100. Japan has decided to have a controlled slow decline, and Japan wants Japan to be Japanese, not to be multicultural. And it says economic structures built on this assumption of family formation are falling. The housing market in many cities face a glut of single occupant units purchased by women, where did they get the money from, who can no longer find partners willing to co-invest. Suburban developments is designed for families sit partially empty. And then more links to various videos about MGTOW, on and on and on. The fall of men, question of loneliness, the men involved in knowledge that we need connection but dispute romantic relations are the only or even the best source. We're in a relationship epidemic. the dating crisis, and that's that thing. The last thing about MGTOW I found of it's interesting and gives a perspective is this. Why is MGTOW a real lifesaver for many of men today? It gives a detailed examination why, and then all the replies are favourable. Samuel 3. I'm not a MGTOW, but I'm happily married, but sometimes it feels I won the lottery and got the last good woman on earth. I always read comments by women, and invariably they are nasty, degrading attacks. And Frank, because no man can afford to take a chance of marriage these days, the chances of having a happy marriage and enjoyable family life is actually quite small. Even my sister-in-law, I sent her a link to one of the MGTOW channels, and she said that the women on there were just awful, horrible. She only watched the first woman complaining on TikTok, and didn't watch any more. But anyway, the Great Wealth Transfer they think is going to benefit women, and Forbes is chomping at the bit, wondering what's going to happen when they control $30 trillion. But as you can see, MGTOW men have put a spoke in the wheel, and it's not going to be as good for them as they think, because men are walking away from modern dating and relationships and the rise of MGTOW. I'll see if I can find anything more, but if you go on this below that, all these ones I've read I had a look at, and 99.99% is all about women getting their hands on the money. But this article and the general consensus is MGTOW is going to put a stop to that. So I think I'm well over the 20 minutes now, so you know the routine, people. Like, dislike, comment, subscribe. It's completely up to you. So until the next week, I think I'll try and find something along the similar lines. But that's it from me. Bye bye.